thought I'd seen very early on in this movie that Hercules was standing next to a rock. But it wasn't just a rock. It was a rock monster! So this time we're looking at Season 4, Episode 10, Hercules Against the Moon Men.
But first, as always, a little follow-up. So we got an email from Lars from Vancouver, who has been listening to our back catalog, and he writes in about Episode 5 on Cry Wilderness.
He says, after you'd been Canadianing it up, I thought you'd give a shout-out to the Vancouver movie riffers that co-wrote that episode of MST3K, the Gentlemen Hecklers. Which I actually didn't know until we got that letter.
Yeah, I had no idea about that. It did have a vaguely Canadian feel to it, that Cry Wilderness script, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Like, it felt like the same kind of Back to the Wilderness feeling that you get with, say, the cartoon The Raccoons.
Well, that's just what I was going to say, because if there were two Canadians working on the riffing script, I can only assume that the many references to Cyril Sneer and his pigs were cut from the script.
So, a reminder, Canada is a big and beautiful country, so we don't always get news about what's happening with our neighbors out west, beyond the prairies or beyond the Rockies. I hear they don't have mosquitoes past the Rockies. I wonder if that's true.
They have a scarier and far more dangerous bug called the superbite.
No, they have banana slugs, which are a different level of eldritch horror.
Don't have too many banana slugs. They'll make you slug constipated. But yeah, I mean, admittedly, whenever I hear a thing about raccoons, I don't automatically think that, hey, a Canadian wrote this. So that might have also been a blinder, but it looks like episode 2 would have been, I guess, the MVP as far as having a bunch of guest writers on, because you also have the Gentlemen Hecklers as well as Bill Corbett, Mary Jo Pehl, and Kevin Murphy, because I think despite making several appearances like later on, they only co-wrote that one episode.
Well, good job, guys.
Yep. Perhaps the key is just putting so many cooks in the pot, because that's how that works.
Yeah, they melt down.
Yeah, that you get that lovely stock. There we go.
And then you can put it in your freezer and stick it as ice cubes into your smoothies.
Yeah. That's what you should do with beef stock. Just have a nice beef smoothie. Beef smoothie would make a great bodybuilder name, by the way. I just want to put that out there. If I ever entered a competition, I would be beef smoothie.
Actually sounds more like a drag queen name.
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
Imagine being like a bodybuilding drag queen. That's the one area in which RuPaul has let everybody down, is not being strong enough to move a boulder.
This time we watched episode 410, Hercules Against the Moon Men. There are some rocky-looking aliens from the moon that have landed on Earth, and they demand regular human sacrifices from the nation of Samar to appease them. The nation's ruler, Queen Samara, is secretly in league with the aliens, and she rebuffs her advisor Claudius's suggestion that they get Hercules to clear out their moonman infestation. He sends for Herc anyway, or rather, he sends his lovely daughter Agar to fetch him. The two reveal to Hercules that they are part of a rebel group planning to overthrow the queen, and then the three of them wander interminably through some secret caverns, where Claudius is killed by wall spikes, and Herc does battle with a Nausicaan. Meanwhile, the head moon man, who looks like a ghost of a Mexican wrestler...
It's a vision of a Mexican wrestler.
El Santo, I'm glad you're here.
Reveals to Samara that his people are attempting to revive their queen during a celestial alignment of some kind. When she revives, the world will die, destroyed by volcanoes and other bad disasters. And it turns out the perfect sacrifice has been the queen's sister all along, the boobful blonde Phyllis. Meanwhile, the queen's men manage to take the strongest man in the world captive by covering him with a fishnet, which apparently has the same effect as putting a blanket over a canary cage. After Herc shows off his mighty strength and pecs, the queen decides she's in the mood for seduction rather than bloodshed. Herc plays along so that he can discover her MO, then gleefully gotches her and runs off.
You thought you had me under your spell, but your magic filter didn't work on me. I knew what I was doing all the time. And now I must liberate Derricks and Agar.
Yes.
As Herc and his followers run to Moonman Mountain to rescue the princess, the weather starts to get very sandy. It's basically Andy Kaufman's Great Gatsby bit with sand and pecs. In the end, Herc saves the girl and defeats the Moon Men, and Queen Samara is crushed in a rock monster group hug. Herc and Agar ride into the sunset to find their next poorly conceived adventure.
And meanwhile, on the satellite of love, in segment 1, Crow and Tom run away from home to live on the other side of the ship. Joel doesn't interfere because he knows it's just their thing and it's what they have to do. Magic Voice allows Joel and Gypsy to spy on their progress, and they come back pretty quickly. After the break, Dr. F and Frank introduce Sandstorm as part of a new program called Deep Hurting. Joel creates, for part of the Invention Exchange, Freakout, and its expansion kit, Super Freakout. This triggers a freakout in Frank, and Servo, who repeats movie sign backwards. Now, see boom. In segment 2, Joel and the bots perform the Malaysian booby trap sketch for 2 reasons. 1, the bots get to repeatedly say boob, and 2, Joel gets to do the perforated skin then drinking from a glass of water gag, laughing style. The Mads pop in to remind us of the upcoming Deep Hurting from the Sandstorm. In segment 3, the bots get beefy arm implants and switch to tough guy names. Anyone can have a tough guy name using Joel's formula. Just pick a punchy first name and employ a hard surface as your surname. Crow is Drake Tungsten, but Tom has trouble thinking of a muscle man name. Perhaps triggered by his crisis of confidence, Tom rejects his muscular donor limbs, prompting Crow to dub him Tommy Torso. Joel and the bots sing a stirring tribute to Pants in segment 4. Frank joins them, but quickly returns to warning of deep hurting from the sandstorm to come. In segment 5, Crow walks us through the old Hollywood adage of Wayne Rogers syndrome. If your actor needs to be replaced for a series, just call Wayne Rogers. It happened to Elliot Gould and Walter Matthau, and it might even happen to you. Crow upsets Gypsy by mentioning Walter Pidgeon was the original Admiral Nelson in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and not her permacrush, Richard Basehart. Back in Deep 13, Dr. F is astounded that the film didn't break Joel and the bots. Freaked out Frank starts asking the big questions like, how do you go to the bathroom in space? Until Dr. F lays some deep hurting on poor Frank.
So what did you think about this episode? Paint us a word picture.
Well, I was actually pleasantly surprised because I had no real memories. I watched this ages and ages ago, and I didn't remember it one way or the other. I just remembered the Deep Hurting and Sandstorm sketches. And I will say that, the host segments in this I really loved, but I was pleasantly surprised that the movie was kind of fun. It's not or the movie and the riffing is kind of a fun episode. It's not like an absolute must-see episode. I think this is more for hardcore fans, but it's one of the Netflix ones. If you've watched 10 or 12 episodes of either the new and old series and want another one, this will be perfectly fine. What about you?
I think this is one for the Deep fans because the Deep Hurting sketch is a really interesting gimmick that they didn't keep going, but it's when the Mads are having more involvement in the actual movie than they usually do. And, they're doing a lot of freaky foreshadowing, which is an interesting dynamic that they didn't really do after that. I think I would have liked that if they would have just given a sense of when the worst part of the movie is coming up so that we can all kind of just watch along and have that sense of dread.
That's something that I think I would have liked to have seen more in the original series, or I guess really in all of the series, is what is happening with the Mads when the film is going on, when the experiment's going on, or when the bots and the human of the moment are taking a break. But I also kind of understand maybe why that was, because the writers always approach the host segments as just oh, this is a fun isolated bit that we get to do. It's just a little sketch that you get to write, and it may or may not be inspired by the film that they had been watching 10 or 12 times that week.
One of the reasons I liked it is it got a sense of why this movie was chosen. The premise is paper thin, it's just a show, and often, the whole situation that this is actually supposed to be driving Joel insane, that is the whole mad scientist project, is to try to, take over the world by making people watch bad movies. So to suggest, like, actually, we picked this out because this one part is extremely hard to get through, is an interesting idea, and goes back into the original premise of the show, that this isn't just a fun riffing show. There are actually moments where it's very hard to watch these movies, and it strains everybody to the point of insanity.
Because, yeah, that's come up very few times. Because, EGA just last week we were watching, or a few weeks ago, had the bots breaking down, but Joel remaining resolute. And I know that that's employed for Manos. I can't think of too many others aside from maybe like hobgoblins. They make a big deal out of it.
Cave dwellers.
Cave dwellers? Oh, do they make a big deal? I've already forgotten if that's the case.
The final segment, they're all just completely zombified, and actually Dr. Forrester responds like, "Oh, come on, this wasn't a bad movie," and they're just very much like, "This is the worst. It almost killed us."
Isn't that where they get into the slideshow segment?
Yeah, with the hang glider.
Yes, because that led to my, I think one of my favorite moments from Crow in the whole series, which is where they get to one of the crowd scenes in Cave Dwellers, and there's a guy with Ray-Bans that they zero in on. And there are tire tracks everywhere, which led to a line that I've never forgotten, which was Crow's, "And as you can see, somebody has been four-wheeling."
Yeah.
One of the all-time greats. But yeah, it's like, it hasn't really come up. I mean, I know they underlined it in the movie and in the new version, like the first episode of the new series, just to emphasize what they're doing for new viewers. But it's been surprisingly kind of absent from the series. I wonder if we'll encounter that more as we explore season 1.
Right. And as for people who are casual fans, I would just say, go see Outlaw. It does everything that this movie does, but much, much better. And
it also has a fabulous attention-grabbing performance by Jack Palance.
Yep.
But it's odd. Like, the Hercules movies are a big part of MST3K, and I suppose now is as good a time as any to say that this is going to be part of an annual thing. For as you see, we are very close to Labor Day, and who better to celebrate Labor Day with than the original 12 laborer, Hercules? So around this time each year, we'll just handpick one of the Hercules experiments and watch it and talk about it. But even though Hercules is a big part of MST3K, like as big a part as Gamera, bigger than Godzilla, and possibly, as prominent as even Bert-I Gordon or Sandy Frank or whatever. None of those experiments have ever really stayed with me. Like, I've seen all of them, and I don't remember any of them.
Mm-hmm.
But none of them are bad. Like, I remember the sketches of all those episodes, but I don't really remember the movie, and that was the same thing here. I don't really remember it. There's some really good riffs. I was especially fond of the silliest riff in the whole damn movie. But Hercules is on a horse, and Joel and the bots are saying, "Hercules, Hercula, Hercules, Hercula, ha 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 ha, my backpack's full of pecs."
Yeah, I would not say that Hercules is something that casual people should get into if they're just getting into MST3K. Like, there's some real gems hidden in there, and usually the segments are pretty strong, but the movies themselves, they just don't impact. But if you have some background on Hercules as a classical hero, maybe watching these movies will be a bit more interesting. So, Adam, what do you know about Hercules?
Well, I was going to ask you a question, which was this. Like, were like tales of Hercules and myths of Hercules, like, was that common reading? Because it's not stuff that I was exposed to as a boy. Like, my greatest exposure to Hercules, I hate to say it, was The Legend of Hercules starring Kevin Sorbo. And I only tuned in for the following reasons. A, Bruce Campbell was in an episode. B, Ted Raimi was in an episode. C, Bruce Campbell and Ted Raimi were in an episode. Or D, an episode in which Hercules is turned into a pig.
Well, I would say Hercules was just, there was a trend in the 50s, well, basically in the mid-century, for strongman performances. So Hercules is very much a Tarzan figure, just you get to watch a manly man punch the lights out of everyone around him. I think it's a very easy fantasy for male watchers to insert themselves into that character. Mm. And it was an excuse to see more TNA than was usually allowed according to the Hays Code, because you were being arguably true to the source material. And all of these Hercules movies that we see were filmed in Italy, and Hercules is a very important part of Italian history, which I can go into now if you'd like.
Only if you keep talking like that.
Okay. So Hercules was the original Greek myth, and I don't know if you went through like a big Greek and Roman myth thing when you were a kid, but I certainly did. I know a lot of other young people I know did as well. But so I was very familiar with Hercules just as a mythical figure.
Okay, no, I hadn't. I was never that exposed to it aside from like pop culture. So my biggest education in Hercules was that cartoon where he was always fighting Daedalus. Hold on, you might be able to answer a very important question then. Did Hercules actually have a power ring?
No.
Oh, man. So he's just a big guy. That's his thing, is that he is basically a walking brick, and he walks around and he sees something that needs thumping, and he just goes around and thumps it. Is that it? What is Hercules, Beth, and why should I care?
Hercules is a demigod. So in the original Greek myth, his name was actually Heracles. So Zeus liked to make it with mortal ladies, and one of the mortal ladies he made it with was Alcmene, and she had a demigod baby who was called Heracles, and his big defining feature was that he was supernaturally strong. And Zeus's wife Hera was very jealous, so she sent 2 serpents to kill the infant child, and his mother came upon him giggling madly, and there was 2 dead snakes in his bassinet because he had murdered them.
That's probably something that wouldn't play today. It's like, why do you like Hercules? Well, he loves killing animals.
So he was best known for the 12 labors of Hercules. So Hera made him go insane, and he killed his wife and child. And even though it wasn't his fault, he felt polluted. And this was a way to kind of unpollute himself by doing these labors. And so there's a whole bunch, most of them defeating big monsters. One of my personal favorites is he had to clean the Aegean stables, which is just basically he had to scoop up some poop. And he had to do it in one day.
How much poop is it?
Well, it was an extremely big stable, so it was beyond the ability of any mortal man, but to get around it, he just he diverted 2 rivers, and that cleaned it out really quickly.
Water pollution, the Hercules way.
Yeah. But what I was kind of reacquainting myself with the myth, and one of the interesting things about Hercules is he seems to be a real disruptor. So all of these myths that are basically explaining why the world is the way it is and the sense of eternality, he disrupts it. So you have Cerberus, the 3-headed dog, as the guardian of Hades. He just goes and takes him and brings him to the surface just to prove that he can. He apparently takes over holding up the world from Atlas for a while, giving him like a brief break. He frees Prometheus from his eternal struggle. Like he's just going around messing up all the things that the gods have put in place to punish mortals, which might explain why he was so popular in Rome. He had a bit of a cult for a while. The Romans worshipped anything, frankly, so that's not surprising. But ever since then, he's been a real staple of Western literature.
What little I knew about Hercules from the myths was that he did come across as more of a merry prankster. So I'd like to think that perhaps he is the inspiration or father figure for frat house pranks, such as, I don't know, stealing a pig. That's the only one I know from that one Simpsons episode because I was never in a frat.
One other interesting note. So he was a demigod, and most demigods did eventually die because they were half mortal. What is interesting with Hercules is, in one myth, he is allowed to enter into Mount Olympus. He was the only demigod that was allowed that, but he still had a mortal part of him, and that mortal part had to go to Hades. So part of Hercules was in Hades, and the rest of him was in Mount Olympus.
Physically? Which half? Which part?
Okay. The ancient peoples had kind of a fluid idea of life. You could just, who knows what will happen tomorrow? You might turn into a constellation, So why couldn't you split yourself into 2 halves?
See, I just kind of naturally assumed that he's literally bisected, so like his upper half is in heaven, just sort of flying around in a cloud, Lakitu style. Meanwhile, on Earth, there is just a bottom half that goes around kicking people.
And this is just it. Like Hades was not like it was close to hell. Like it wasn't a place of punishment, but it's just where everybody went. And it was supposed to be, and it was considered to be very grim and despairing. And you weren't looking forward to dying because that would be really kind of a bummer. So. Like there was no unless you got into the Elysian Fields, which was basically the nicest part of Hades, and only heroes ended up there. It was still not great. So this idea that part of Hercules was just having a bum rap, it was just kind of interesting.
Yeah. So wait, now when did you go through this phase?
I don't know, 7 or 8. It was about the time, like I was a precocious kid. I was in a rural environment, and if you had, when I was already done all of my schoolwork and they had nothing else to give to me, every single classroom had a set of World Book encyclopedias. So I would just pick a random letter and read it. And I picked up mythology.
Oh, wow. It's funny. I had roughly around the same age, I had the same kind of obsession. Not for Hercules. I would carry around this digest that had come out. It was this 2-volume series that was all the Sherlock Holmes stories and novels written by Conan Doyle. So if there was ever a chance to finish something early or have free time during class, that's what I would read. That would be the first thing that I would want to do, is just to reread those things over and over again.
It's funny you bring up Sherlock Holmes, because I was thinking about a modern day equivalent of I think how Hercules existed in Western culture for so long, and the closest I could come up with is Sherlock Holmes. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody thinks he's the greatest, and you keep getting these like reinventions of him every once in a while, and it just becomes something that is a touchstone for a culture.
What is it that I'm missing because I don't find him like appealing as a character? For a brief moment, I thought I was genuinely missing out on something when you described Hercules the prankster who put half of his body in heaven and kept the other half on Earth. That sounds like a kind of bonkers and very impulsive character that like you could kind of understand. But for me, he's always just been a bland, muscular figure. And a lot of that comes from his interpretation in film and TV. Like, I never get a sense of who this guy is other than, well, he's a big, bulky guy. Like, who's the most famous Hercules? It's like, well, it's the guy who's not in this one. It's George Reeves, isn't it? Is it George Reeves?
Steve Reeves.
Steve Reeves. Thank you. George Reeves, yeah, is Superman. But yeah, Steve Reeves is just like a muscly guy with like good hair and beard combo, and that's it. He's got solid hair and beard combo. You watch that, and you go, hey, that's a guy who knows how to go around his head, butt.
I would say about Hercules too is that he's a flawed hero. Like, even though he has these great powers, like he's kind of a dummy. He's easily tricked. He thinks with his heart, not his head, and he, like, most of the problems he gets into are completely of his own making. So he's a lovable bumbler in a lot of ways too. So I think there's a lot there to work with, and if I can make a theory about why he has been so kind of enduringly popular throughout the centuries, it's that even though he has godlike powers, he is solidly on the side of mortals. And he is a hero for humans, and that is part of what he does. Is he takes all these horrible things that the gods do to people, and he wrecks them up, and he goes after awful monsters. And so he has like a classic like Beowulf, like he's big and strong, and people like big and strong characters. But he also he's a Superman figure. He's a champion of the little guy.
Yeah, I can see that. I guess, I'm always reminded of reading those very, very early Superman comics. I always liked Superman as a character, but you read those early comics and he's walking around and someone comes up to him and goes, Superman, the bankers want to foreclose my home. And he basically takes those bankers, throws them in a cave and buries them in it. Like, he causes the cave to cave in. Goes back to see the lady in the last panel and says, you won't be hearing from bankers anytime soon. This is not an exaggeration. This is one of the first Superman comics. So he's just like a big, like I said, a brick. And if other writers kind of made that more of a fantasy figure with a more elaborate backstory and kind of a moral code and all of this. And where I never got that from Hercules, other than like, Hercules, you want to fight this monster? And I guess my interest is not in seeing a guy fight a monster. I want to know what that cool monster's up to.
We should mention before we leave this topic that this actually isn't Hercules, it's Maciste, who is actually Hercules. It's very confusing. Adam, do you want to explain this a little bit further?
What we have here is another Magic Voyage of Sinbad situation. As you know, in that movie, they made it a Sinbad film because the character of Sadko, which I can only assume is a corporation that manufactures tears, was not well known to English audiences. So they made it Sinbad, even though the film bears none of the trappings of a Sinbad movie. In this case, Maciste is another Hercules lovable oaf muscle man, as far as I can tell, and they made a series of movies about Maciste in Italy, one of which is Colossus versus the Headhunters, which they tackle in season 6. So I guess we'll sink into a nice juicy Maciste at that time.
And apparently Maciste was basically Hercules, but with a different name, like it's his last name, but the series became so popular that it became its own thing. So it's like you have Sherlock Holmes, but he goes under the name of the Beekeeper, and then that ends up being the Beekeeper series.
You know, that reminds me of the whole Conan Cull thing, because what happened in a very Roger Corman-like move, when the writer of Conan was selling stories, he also was trying to sell as many Conan stories as possible, naturally, to any publication that would take them. And when he was turned down, he came up with, well, okay, you don't like this traveling swordsman character. How about a traveling swordsman named Cull, who has a very similar backstory? And people bought that just because of these slight alterations. Like, well, at least we're not flooding the market with more Conan stories. So that's why you have these two almost identical characters.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like something that's happening here. Just to distinguish themselves slightly from the Hercules movies that were probably already being made, they made a Maciste, who is actually Hercules, but we'll call him Maciste just to do our own thing. We'd like to talk about monsters if the movie we're watching features one. They're often the most interesting part of the movie, and they went with a really strange choice here with a bunch of kind of shambling rock monsters. I don't know what that has to do with the moon, but you have any insights, Adam?
Well, the moon's made of rock, so I guess that's it. It was either rock monsters or cheese monsters. Which would make, again, a great Wallace and Gromit film. If they did a shot-for-shot remake of this, except with cheese monsters, just done stop-motion Aardman Studio style, I would be super into it. But as far as I can tell, they had spent all of their money on the design for the head moon man, King of the Moon, whatever he was, with his weird mask, his weird Day of the Dead looks.
Genuinely kind of creepy, actually.
Yeah, I liked him, actually. As a design, he was pretty neat. But it looks like all the money was spent on that and perhaps, I don't know, oiling up Steve Reeves. Or not even Steve Reeves. My God, Alan Steele.
Alan Steele. Yeah, Crow actually points out at one point that when he's trying to push away the wall spikes, that the wall spike smears his tanner ever so slightly. But to go back to the rock monster head guy, or I guess the head moon man, for people at home who aren't planning to watch this movie again, it looks like someone put a silver bucket over someone's head and drew big owl eyes on it, basically, and kind of scary teeth that goes around the whole bucket. And then he wears a big silver cape.
It's kind of awesome. He looks like a slasher movie villain. But the rock monsters themselves are basically just these sort of, I guess they're supposed to be terrifying golems. Golden Globuses, I don't know.
Right. I don't even know if they had styrofoam in the 60s, but they just look kind of like someone's wearing a big styrofoam or rubber suit that has been designed to look like jagged rocks. And it is slightly unsettling because they don't have faces. So even though they have the shapes of human beings, they don't have any eyes or mouths or anything. And they shamble like zombies. So I wonder why monsters made out of rock would be something that would, get our little reptilian brain stems, tweaking. And I think maybe it's because like the most unalive thing you can imagine are rocks, So the idea of them contorting into something human-like is going against kind of a deep sense of the hierarchy of the world or something.
So does that mean the pet rock fad of the 70s was like an experiment in like controlling your fear through exposure therapy?
Yeah, I think so. It's just like this thing could be alive, but maybe I can tame it. Another reason why this movie is a bit hard to watch is it is unrelentingly brown. This is the brownest movie I think we've ever seen. And that might have something to do with the film stock. Adam, I know you're a little bit of a film buff. Can you shed any light on the very sepia-toned condition of this movie?
Well, sure. It was shot using Eastmancolor. Eastmancolor was developed as a rival to Technicolor, and I'd always kind of wondered this because I always found the early color movies to be absolutely gorgeous, and what followed in say like the later 60s and 70s to be less impressive. And essentially, Eastman was developed to be a cheaper process. And what I'd found, and it's time to Canadian it up again, from none other than the NFB archives, is that one of the first color movies made in Canada was called Royal Journey, and is said on this blog post on the NFB blog to be the National Film Board's first major hit. And essentially, the story behind it is, in 1951, that's when Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh were like in Canada for a whole month. And they wanted to film it, and they wanted to show it off, and they wanted to use Technicolor, the NFB did. But unfortunately, the National Film Board of Canada didn't quite have the resources and the money to handle Technicolor, because Technicolor, as it turns out, and this goes a long way to explaining why it fell into fashion, not only was it more expensive to process as color film, but the cameras required for Technicolor, like, you needed special operators who were trained only in Technicolor cameras. You couldn't just handle it like any other camera. So they needed something cheaper and easier. This is why so many Poverty Row movies were filmed in black and white, why a lot of cheap television of even later on was still in black and white, and why whenever a movie was sort of deemed a B movie, it would be shot in black and white. This is why Psycho was shot in black and white. It was mostly to save money. But the National Film Board, they filmed it this way, and they ended up with an hour of footage, and they'd never done a project this big before. So essentially, they were showing it to distributors to see, hey, how can we make this palatable for audiences? And apparently the owner of the famous cinemas chain just said, boys, I love 55 hours of color footage of royalty visiting Canada. You get this to me by Christmas Day, and I'll just show it as is on a loop. And that's the story of Royal Journey. But yeah, that was a big part of the Eastmancolor's debut in Canada. But as far as I can tell from the Eastman film stock, is that it tends to degrade very quickly. So I have no idea how good this film looked, or how bad even that this film looked in its original prints, because obviously, like, a lot of the MST3K movies were just in rough shape by the time they made it to TV. Yeah. And like European movies, I've noticed, tend to be like the ones that suffered the most. They had like the muddiest prints. I mean, think about when we watched the Spy movie.
The Spy movie. Danger Death Ray.
There we go. See, it doesn't sound like a spy movie. It sounds like a space movie. But anyway, when we watched Danger Death Ray, like, that movie was like coated in peanut butter. Yeah. Like, you could barely make anything out. But I actually found like the original print, like someone had put a remastered version of it up on YouTube in its original cut, and which notably didn't feature the continuity or ending, but it looked gorgeous. Like, I could watch it even though the print was not in English. I could watch it because it was so pretty. So I have no idea if the original version of Hercules would have looked that good, given that most of it takes place in underground papier-mâché cave sets. I'm going to say no.
Yeah, that's my feeling. So I did a bit of research too. So, they separated the color into three chambers: cyan, magenta, and yellow. Anyone who knows about those color divisions would be familiar with them. And cyan, the bluish color, is what degrades the fastest. So that is why often the blue skies look very white in these old movies, and why everything tends to be on a very warm sort of palette and kind of gets yellowy with age, especially with Eastmancolor. But as you said, this movie also makes a lot of strange choices. It seems to be filmed in a desert. The initial shots of Hercules, he's hanging around in a bunch of like sandy dunes. Much of the movie seems to take place inside a termite colony. And the mountain itself also looks like the outside of a termite colony. And like, I've been to Italy. Italy is gorgeous. It is a beautiful green place. I don't know how they managed to make Italy look ugly, but they have.
Maybe they were making a Maciste movie and they're like, hey, you can't film your shitty movie here, and they chased them out of town.
Interestingly enough, the Moon Man sequences inside the moon cave, where it's strangely green, those were deliberately filmed in just like a sepia tone, so they took out the other two filters. So it's supposed to look yellow there, which makes me think that maybe the rest of the movie at one point had a lot richer color to it.
I'd say. And you know, in addition to like the point that you mentioned, which is that it tends to degrade very quickly, you know, these European movies never seem to hold up. They're always super muddy on MST3K.
Yeah. I have seen side-by-side shots of Eastmancolor versus like remastered Technicolor, and it can be quite striking. If you want to find a good source for this, there's an article on remastered Bollywood movies, and like they went out of their way to make their movies as like colorful and, you know, a visual feast as possible. So it's really just amazing to see the difference in that context.
Well, that's one of the things I loved about early Technicolor is that they tended to pile on. If you watch like movies and TV from the 60s that are in color, they just pile on the kind of color to the point where it's almost a sugar rush to watch the movies. But that's part of the appeal. Like there's something to be said about like eye-popping 60s productions. And so I'd be really curious to see some remastered Eastman footage to see if they're planning to use color the same way, if it's still, you know, a novelty worth putting as much kind of information and focuses into for the viewer, or if they just treated it like, well, this is not going to look as good, so let's just film it as is. If you potentially have a remastered copy of Hercules Against the Moon Man, send us a screen cap. I'd like to see what it originally looked like.
Yeah, I will, and this is something I would love like an expert in this to weigh in on, but it always seemed to me that Technicolor tended to get really saturated colors, but it always seemed to kind of draw more towards red, whereas Eastmancolor draws more towards yellow, and neither one of them does blues and purples all that well. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that's just I'm off base there, or if there is like a tendency to go towards the warm end of the scale in these early color dye situations.
Yeah, film lab technicians, write in. We want to know.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shadow 13.
You know what time it is?
It's tool time. Let's pelt Tim Allen with rocks.
Time for Shallow 13.
It's time for 13 fun facts about both this episode and the film featured therein, Hercules Against the Moon Man. We begin now. Go, Beth, go!
The Super Freakout sketch is the source of two great bloopers on the MST poopy tape. In one, Joel fails to properly freak out and stands awkwardly. And the next take, Joel causes a major freakout by knocking over the box, revealing a giant spider that was painted on the other side.
The King of the Moon looks like the ghost of a Mexican wrestler, which prompts Crow's El Santo riff. El Santo was one of the most famous luchadors, masked Mexican wrestlers. But we'll get into more detail when we get to episode 624, Samson versus the Vampire Woman.
Joel and the bots compare the caves in this film to a Doctor Who set. The original Doctor Who, which ran from 1963 to 1989, was infamous for using rock quarries as locations for alien planets.
When Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy author Douglas Adams became Who's script editor in '79, the season began with the Doctor landing in a rock quarry and exclaiming, "Oh look, rocks!"
The Mad's new catchphrase, Deep Hurting, is a play on the ad campaign for Deep Heating, a menthol cream pain reliever. We'll have a clip in the show notes.
Joel references Trog with Joan Crawford, a 1970 creature feature where Crawford plays a scientist who discovers the missing link. It would be her final film and considered by many to be her worst, though John Waters is a big fan.
Crow's riff, around this time the old skunk had gotten into the pepper pot, shows off Trace Beaulieu's perfect Rex Allen impression. Allen was a singing cowboy actor in the Gene Autry mold, best known for his folksy narration of Disney nature films. He also narrated the original Charlotte's Web and had a hit single, regrettably titled Don't Go Near the Indians. We'll put some links in the show notes.
Hey, speaking of race impressions, Crow imitates the Crypt Keeper from HBO's Tales from the Crypt. This MST3K episode aired in '92, a milestone year for your old pal the Crypt Keeper, resulting in the release of The Crypt Jam, the second novelty rap by a punning corpse behind Dee Dee Ramone's Mashed Potato Time.
Crow's recurring bit,
Good job, McCloud.
is a reference to the popular 1970s cop show McCloud, centering around a New Mexican marshal on loan to the NYPD. The line was originally said by Chief Clifford, who solidified the trope of the curmudgeonly chief of police who butts head with, but ultimately respects, his cowboy cop that plays by his own rules.
Joel and the bots are quick to notice the flesh on display in this film, including one scene that inspires Joel to say,
Guys, I am so homesick right now.
"This is one of the few times his character expresses any sexual desire at all."
And yet at another moment, after a close-up of Alan Steele's bronze pecs, Crow quietly tells Joel that he feels funny.
A Porky's 2 riff follows a scene where a woman spies on the action through a hole in the wall. As Community fans will tell you, a Porky's is when a man spies on women through a hole in the wall, but a woman doing so is a classic reverse Porky's.
During the interminable sandstorm sequence, Crow mentions Woman in the Dunes. The reference is to a classic art movie from the 60s by director Hiroshi Teshigahara. In this Kafkaesque story, an amateur entomologist is trapped at the bottom of a giant sand pit with a mysterious woman who seems to have accepted her fate. The movie is lauded for its striking cinematography, its eroticism, and its reflection of Zen philosophy.
And that's time!
So, Adam, this movie, if anything, is famous in MST3K for its 5-minute long sequence of a sandstorm where absolutely nothing happens except a bunch of bodies wander around in sand.
That's true. We, the audience, fail to see much of it.
So let's try to make sand more interesting. Welcome to our new segment, The Sandbox. The Sandbox. Adam, come join me in the sandbox.
I am reluctantly sitting in this box of sand. I do not like sand. It is tough and grainy. It is not like Padme.
If it's anything like our neighborhood sandbox, you'll have to watch out for cat poop.
Go cats. I like that. This is a giant toilet made for me, thinks local cat.
So, if you've ever looked up close to sand, it's actually quite beautiful. It's usually made up of little pieces of different kinds of rock and tiny little shells. We'll have a link to the show notes of super magnified sand. And also, sand is different in different regions. So, the beautiful white sand you get in tropical areas is because of limestone. And, of course, Prince Edward Island is well known for its red sand, which is very hard. My sister just went there. It's hard as a rock, but it is still sand.
Yeah, that's better than the beaches of Newfoundland, which are literally just rocks.
Right. Some kinds of sand you can use in concrete, which is apparently running out. So sand is considered a non-renewable resource because even though it is made out of the erosion of rocks, it takes a very, very long time to do that. So we could actually run out of sand.
Oh no! What will we do without sand? Children will never be able to see, oh God, the sand being kicked in their eyes by the local Alan Steele. And
Adam, I feel like you're not really getting into the sand bit very much.
I'm not.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to make this work. You start making a sandcastle, and I'll tell you more about sand.
Can there be a moat in this sandcastle?
Yeah, go ahead, but make sure that you put it far away from your sandcastle because you might end up wrecking its foundations, and your sandcastle will fall into the sand.
Oh man!
As my daughter found out when she first tried to make a sandcastle, and then started to cry. There's Dune. That's got a lot of sand in it. Lawrence of Arabia. It's a beautiful movie that takes place in a desert. We've mentioned Woman in the Dunes. Apparently they make sand erotic. I haven't seen it, and I'm kind of afraid to because the idea of being trapped at the bottom of a sand dune is, I don't know, if it makes me feel very claustrophobic.
Also, I don't want to think about erotic applications of sand.
There's Ishtar, which is not a good movie, but it has sand in it. There's Star Wars has the sand planet, right?
Doesn't every Star Wars have a sand planet? Or at least most of them? There's
the one with the winter planet where they have to slice open that one.
Oh yeah, that's the Star Wars Christmas special.
Yeah. They have to tear open one of Chewbacca's relatives to stay warm.
Yeah, I believe that's where they find Art Carney.
What else about sand?
Well, there was Star Trek V and Land Before Time, which we had mentioned.
All right. Last time I went home, we went to a dairy farm, and you know what? Instead of straw, the cows sleep in sand. They look like they really like it.
Sand cows. Okay, I can get behind that. Question. We've talked about this a little bit. Have you seen the movie Dune? Have you tried to watch that thing?
No, one of the things that I'm planning to do once I submit my dissertation for good is to read Dune and watch the David Lynch version. I've seen the documentary about the movie that never was, the Jodorowsky.
Yes, that's a fascinating movie.
I have seen that, so I have some sense of what Dune's about.
No, you don't. Not if you watch that and that alone. That said, like I've read some of Frank Herbert's work. I've never read Dune. It's extremely popular, but I never saw the appeal in it, and the movie just kind of hammered home. It's like, maybe I don't want to get into Dune. It's got amazing set design. It's got Kyle MacLachlan with like blue contact lenses. It's got a score by the band Toto, of all things. And it's got those amazing sandworms that, even more than the stuff from the book, was definitely the inspiration for the sandworms in Beetlejuice. And that's about it. Great cast, terrible movie.
Okay. You can make glass out of sand, and apparently that is what they're planning to do if we ever colonize Mars, is they're just going to have to use all the sand in Mars to build structures out of glass.
Oh, I was secretly hoping you were going to say it's like, and some crazy billionaire is going to turn into a planet made of glass. You know what they say about people who live on glass planets?
No, what did they say, Adam?
Oh, they shouldn't throw stones.
But throwing sand is fine. No, it's not. It gets in your eyes. You can use sand to clean things. Sandblasting is a good way to get paint off of brick.
Not to mention, if you're feeling filthy, just blast your body with sand.
I can't think of anything else to say about sand.
And it ends.
The Sandbox. Okay, let's go back to our houses and get sand all over everything.
Hey.
Oh god, there's so much in my shoes. This feels gross.
This isn't technically a Hercules movie, since we have a switch over in the international releasing. But for most audiences then in North America, they would have been a bit weirded out by the fact that popular Hercules, Steve Reeves, was not playing Hercules, and it was instead a fellow by the name of Alan Steele. Crow references this in a sketch, or the Wayne Rogers effect, at the end of the episode. Beth, any thoughts on switching actors in long-running franchises like this?
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. This is when you have a new movie and you have a new person taking on that role?
Yeah, the Wayne Rogers effect, if I'm following Crow's logic here, because he's mostly talking about, in the sketch, a switch from movies to TV series based on or following up those movies. Like, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, the series, if I recall correctly, is like a sequel to the movie, but the version of MASH that aired on TV is a brand new series. Like, it's not connected to the movie directly. Like, it's just a telling of that same story with characters. Think of it like Buffy.
Right. I was thinking of Buffy as like being a really good example of this.
Yeah, and the only actor who came back, I guess this is where the confusion comes in. The only actor who came back from the movie was Gary Berghoff, who played the same role in both series. Radar, who like left MASH, I think, 4 seasons in to star in his own ill-fated spin-off. That's what he's talking about, but I think by acknowledging like Hercules just being recast, he's almost like talking about the recasting of Bond, or the recasting of like Batman, or the recasting of like Hercules and Tarzans and such.
I think what he's trying to imply in this sketch is that replacements can often feel like a step down, that you're getting like the budget version, which is the case if you're going from movie to TV. You're getting the lower budget version of this actor. So you're getting, what was the joke about Skeet Ulrich always being the poor man's replacement of
Johnny Depp? Yeah, he was $5 Johnny Depp.
Right.
That's what I called him when Scream came out, and I couldn't remember his name.
With Batman and Bond, it often feels like you're just progressing laterally. Like, it doesn't feel like a drop in quality, but sometimes it can. One of the more problematic examples of this was when Jodie Foster stepped away from the Clarice Starling role, and we got Julianne Moore, who is an amazing actress, but that was not her role. So it did feel like a step down in a strange way, even though like she is a quality actress.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because like I had such a weird case of mixed feelings with that casting because, okay, Julianne Moore is an amazing actress, and I also feel like she's a much better actor than Jodie Foster is, but Jodie Foster is incredible in Silence of the Lambs, and Julianne Moore I think is probably dispirited by the fact that that movie gives her nothing to do. Like, she's given nothing interesting in Hannibal, which is a really lousy movie. Whereas Silence of the Lambs is a great movie.
Although I will always have, I was slightly scarred by the brain eating sequence.
Oh, that's my favorite part. That's the one part of the movie I like, because Ray Liotta's all drugged out.
I knew you'd like that one.
Oh, you should really try this. Like, he's all super mellow from being lobotomized, and it's a scene that is like totally out of place, or at least it belongs to a different movie. Like, it feels like it's part of this like really sick, fun comedy that the rest of Hannibal bears no resemblance to.
So, in the Amazing Colossal episode guide, Michael J. Nelson does the reflections on this one, and he has a strange voice. So I'm just going to read it out to you to see what you think. I submit that Alan Steele is a pale simulacrum of Steve Reeves. Although Steele captures the vapidity of our steroidal hero nicely, he lacks the dash and vitality of Reeves. He seems not to relish his brainless conquests in the matter of a Reeves, a Park, or even your Ferrigno. It's just lucky he didn't derail the Hercules juggernaut entirely, if I may mix my metaphors. I feel it only fair to note that the majority of writers disagree with my assessment and find Reg, Hercules, and the Captive Women Park to be far inferior to Alan Steele. Paul kept pushing the issue, needling me until I had to hit him.
Wow. This is something that I encountered a lot when I read Mike Nelson's nonfiction books. Did you ever read like Mind Over Matters or Movie Mega Cheese?
No.
I did. I ordered them because they had happened towards the end or slightly after the end of the TV series on its original run. And I remember kind of picking them up, and they had like a similar, not studied, but like kind of a faux mannered language around them, just for like kind of a dry effect, as though it's as though they were intended to be read as part of something like Documentary Now, like something that is spoofing NPR. Well, Documentary Now spoofs Vice, but you know what I mean? It was something that spoofs the style of something, and it has this very kind of dry NPR, This American Life style to it, and everything he writes is like that, I've noticed. Like Timmy Big Hands, the website, also had writing like that, which was another MST3K spinoff. So I think that's just a mode that he gets into for comedy writing outside of like TV and live performances, and that's probably why it shows up so much in his work, and certainly would have been the case with the Amazing Colossal episode guide being the first like book he would be attached to.
Interesting. All right, Chris, what do you got for us?
So instead of a listener question this time around, I thought we would do some MST3K news to see if you have any thoughts on something that's happening in the wide world of MST3K. You may or may not have seen this, but as we record yesterday, Netflix announced that they are going to be releasing for a very limited time and in a very limited location a set of strains of cannabis that relate to several of its original shows, including a strain that is dedicated to Mystery Science Theater 3000. These will be available for a weekend-long pop-up event in West Hollywood, so good luck getting your hands on this. It's called Moon 13 Blend, and yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Should have been an edible.
Yes, it totally should have been an edible, and it should have been shaped like the moon if it's going to be a Moon 13 thing.
They come in little, like, jars, like they're from the what's the name of that American candle factory or whatever it's called?
Yankee Candles or
Gates McFadden's Candles.
It comes from Gates McFadden's Candles. They're very handsome, and it's got a logo of the moon with one of the boneheads sort of hovering in front of it.
See, I think it's a huge mistake to release an MST3K weed and not put it in a box of Hamdingers. But yeah, I don't know. My interest level in this is greatly diminished compared to the thought of getting my hands on an SNES Classic.
Good luck. That will also be hard to come by.
Exactly. But if my choices are novelty weed from a content provider or playing Earthbound again, I know what I'm trying to get.
Crazy millennials with their pop-ups and their spinets. I don't get it.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you have the lowdown on old film stocks, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam a random off-topic question, get in touch with us. Comment on our Facebook group, Email us at info@itsjustashow.com, visit our website at itsjustashow.com, or we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you to all our Patreon supporters. You can support It's Just a Show and access some superfan bonus bits by going to itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. Another way you can help the show is to leave a review on iTunes. The more reviews we get, the more people can find the show. We especially need a few more reviews from Americans. So if you've dropped a few sentences for us, thank you. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned on It's Just a Show, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/12.
All right, Chris, what are we watching next?
So in the same year as Hercules Against the Moon Men, another Italian film was made, Hercules, Prisoner of Evil. In a script that's presumably by Agatha Christie, Hercules is trying to find out who is killing all these villagers, only to realize that he's been given a potion that has transformed him into a murderous werewolf. It's him. So in honor of this, we'll be watching Season 9, Episode 4, Werewolf.
Whoa. That was an interesting journey, Chris. Thank you.
That took us some places.
I have watched this before, but I remember very little about it other than being underwhelmed. Sorry, people who want us to be nicer to the sci-fi era.
Well, we may find a good one in time, but maybe this will be it. I do know this. I actually rented this movie when it came out, like, not missed it.
Of course you did.
Because it had one of those irresistible covers that was a hologram, so if you changed it, if you tilted it slightly, it would either be a wolf man or just a man with glowing eyes.
And I know this is one of the episodes from the sci-fi era that people recommend.
Yeah, this is like a top 21 for those folks.
Yeah, so I will go into it trying not to have like my previous reception coloring how I receive it, because I want it to be good. I really do.
Yeah. 2 weeks from now, Beth and I are going to decide if you people are right or if you need to be sent to jail.
All right, so on that note...
Until next time, keep those pecs nicely bronzed.
Yeah, and you know what? Moon men out there, you do you. I like your look with all your rocks and such.
Take it away, Theme Squad.
I can't think of anything else to say about sand.